Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 66 of Restitching the Tapestry. It is 66, right? Yes, 66 of Restitching the Tapestry. It's good to have all of you here tonight. We've all had a long week, so we're managing, we're hanging in there, and we're just really happy to have all of you with us tonight. I had like this weird existential moment. I realized that my computer is a touch screen.
I do that all the time because mine's a touch screen and I do it all the time.
I don't know how I function. I really don't. But anyway, sorry, had to share that really quickly. But yes, so we obviously we're talking about a very difficult topic tonight because it's something that's been happening over the past couple of months, and it's been mounting in the news, and we really wanted to have a conversation. But before we get to any of that, let's just talk a little bit about how we've been doing and what we've been up to. So, Ari, do you want to go first this time around?
Sure. So it's been an interesting week. Last weekend, I had a rash that started to develop. And I called my mom at 6 a.m, and I was like, I think I might be reacting to my mood stabilizer because apparently my mood stabilizer is very sensitive. And if you up the dosage too fast or stop taking it and then you do take it, it can cause this all over body rash that can kill you. So I was developing a rash, and I'm called my mom up and I'm like, I think it's causing me to have a rash. And she's like, oh my God, we need to get you to urgent care now.
Oh my God.
So they were like, I don't think that's causing it, but here's some meds. So that was my fun week. And I talked to my psychiatrist today, and she was like, psychiatrist. And she was like, that looks fine. It's not causing it. You have acne.
No, that's so much better though. I'm glad to hear that that's what it was, not something serious.
Yeah.
It was just I waited till 6 o'clock in the morning when my mom is half awake and I'm like, hey, I'm dying.
I mean, if you were in panic mode, I would have done the same thing. At 6 a.m, if I got up to go to the bathroom and I noticed something, I'd be like, so I totally got that.
But that was my exciting thing for this week. Someone else go.
Sherri, how about you?
I mean, when you were like, yeah, we've all had quite a week. So anyway, let's talk about it. It's like, oh, do we have to?
Of course.
My week, mostly grading. I have come to the conclusion, y'all, though, that the old gray mare, that's me, ain't what she used to be. Oh, yes. Also, that's Mojo. He's decided to join the chat tonight behind me.
I love him.
He is pretty adorable. But I've come to the conclusion that the old gray mare ain't what she used to be. I'm getting older, and I now have a cane. And I'm not happy about it. Let's not dwell on it. But it is helping me get around better. So I am happy for that. But
I can see you rocking a cane like a classy accessory, though.
Well, more like house. But anyway.
Oh, well, I can imagine that kind of having that realization was a bit frustrating, or not necessarily frustrating, but existential, I guess.
Yeah, it's frustrating. And it just is what it is. So my advice to everybody here is don't get old because it sucks. 10 out of 10, don't recommend.
I guess the alternative is worse, though.
I don't know. Is it? Some days the pain I'm in.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think that you're going to rock aging, though, like fine wine. And that is going to overpower everything else, in my opinion. I hope that I rock it as well as I get older, too. We'll see. I don't know.
All I'm hearing is that Sherri's going to age like fine wine and get everybody drunk around her.
Yes, that's my plan.
Yes. I love that.
That will be my ascension moment. And thank you, Arby. Arby says I don't look old, so thank you. You're my favorite. You're in
Was
the
that
well.
Larity I heard? We have like the cats are present tonight.
The cats are making their presence known.
They're here to comfort we gays during, this difficult topic. But so for me, my week has been pretty okay. It's been really busy. I've been although today I did have a chance, like after meetings and stuff, to just lay down on a bed and watch a show, which I've not done in a million years. And it was really, really nice. I've been catching up on the show 1,000-Pound Sisters. I know it's one of my horrible, guilty reality TV shows.
Oh my God, that's a guilty pleasure. I love following that on YouTube.
I follow them on YouTube too.
And I watch all of the reactors. Oh no.
This might be a future show because I have a hard time with fat as entertainment.
So at first, like the show has changed tone drastically since I've watched it. Like at first, I think it really was aimed at just making fun of these two people, which is to me incredibly problematic. But now it's kind of turned into more of a narrative of what defines healthy, what doesn't define healthy for individuals, right? So I think once you get through the first season, it becomes a little bit more interesting in that regard. But then again, there's still a lot of criticism. There's still a lot of valid criticism of it. But
because still at the end of the day, it's about, let's go gawk at these fat people. And let's go to the zoo. And I'm not okay with that.
Well, and it's TLC that does it too. So
of course it is.
TLC, I think, needs to drastically improve with how they present things, because they're obviously in it for like the entertainment factor, where I think that there needs to be more story, more humanization, let's just say.
But that's why I only follow it on YouTube. I don't watch the show itself, is because I don't want to give them the ratings. But like, because I hang around the weight loss community, and like there are some people who are trying to lose weight in the weight loss community and some people who aren't, but like they bring up 1,000-Pound Sisters pretty regularly. So I'm like, I'm tangentially aware of what's going on in the show.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. So before we get to talking about tonight's topic, per the usual, let's go through our show's mission statement, okay? We live in a dynamic society where social media shapes us by creating greater opportunities for connection. It has led to a developing understanding of the adversity many marginalized communities face, the powers causing the adversity, and those who act as bystanders as those atrocities take place in real time. Our goal with this show is to make connections and have challenging conversations about social topics, current events, pop culture, and art. Together, let's weave the threads of understanding with what privilege we have in order to learn, educate, and create in a world that's growing. So, and Larity just shared his opinion on that.
Larity
Sorry.
No, don't. I love Larry. Like, he is more than welcome to be as vocal as possible. So we have joining us this evening, we have Panda, Alsatian, Arpy, Leo, Sophia's here. Yeah, and Kaishana's here. Leo made his regular comment about praying hands.
Should be a drinking game, right? Every time there's praying hands, take a shot. Please don't die.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, so let's begin talking about this topic. So if you've watched one of my recent videos, I think it was the last video I made, I brought up Florida's current legislation, which is being dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill, which is essentially a bill that is decorated as, enhancing parental rights of, ownership over children. But it's truthfully dictating education, what topics are discussed in education, and it's done so at the expense of LGBTQ plus youth, where they might be placed in harm's way in the sense that if they reveal anything about themselves, it could be, revealed to the parents, or like it might be legally expected for the school and educators to reveal that information to parents. Obviously, that would put LGBTQ youth in harm's way, especially if they are in an abusive situation or if they are faced with potential homelessness, whole variety of different really unsettling ramifications. So
right. There's also, it's also, the teachers aren't allowed to talk about anything gay. So you can't talk about like the Stonewall riots, and you can't talk about, any kind of, pro-gay legislation. Like how far down the rabbit hole does that go? Like if I bring up a joke that I heard on Will and Grace 20 years ago, am I going to get sued as an educator? Right? Like how far down the rabbit hole does this go? Where does this take us? Because that's ostensibly what it's about. Is they're like, well, the schools should just be teaching math, science, and reading and writing and all this stuff. They don't need to be teaching our children. It's another offshoot of, but what about the children? We have to, don't indoctrinate them with your evil gay ways. We have to keep them safe and secure. So, this really hamstrings teachers in a lot of ways because gay people exist, right? We exist.
What?
I know. I don't want to be the one to break
I'm
it
kidding.
to you. I know, like fake news. But as like queer people exist. And so how do you take that out of your lesson plans? How do you take that out of life and out of discussions? It's like not being able to talk about people of color, or not being able to talk about Muslim people, or not being able to talk about any other faction of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But even worse than that, like imagine if you're a teacher and you're LGBTQ. Like, can you talk about your relationships at all, or like who you are as a person? Like, do you have to hide who you are at school? Does that mean they're going to try to get you fired because you are in that group? Like,
right.
How far does it go? And
Right.
that's like the biggest thing is like, how damaging is this going to be?
Yeah. If I'm a gay teacher and I'm married, can my partner now not come to school functions?
Mm-hmm. Or
Right?
what if children have 2 LGBTQ plus parents? And are they expected to just not talk about their life at all at school? Are they expected to
Right.
just walk through those doors and completely
Mhm.
ignore the fact that both parents are a part of their of this community?
Mhm.
Like that's really unsettling in so
Yeah.
many different ways.
Mhm.
So far we've heard that obviously this bill is advancing. The latest we've heard, and I think we heard this as of today,
Mhm.
that the bill has passed through an education committee as of Tuesday, February 8th, according to CBS News. It still needs to pass 2 more Senate committees, and it could go into effect as soon as July 1st of this year. And that would mean that educators would have until July of 2023 to make sure that their lesson plans are adhering to this bit of legislation. And my heart really goes out to LGBTQ plus people in Florida, but I will admit, reading this and knowing about this over the past week has made me feel like really heavy over the past few days, because
Sure.
it makes me realize that we are existing in this reality where there are entire states where large groups of people still think that it's completely acceptable to erase and silence entire communities, especially the LGBTQ plus community.
Mhm.
And the question that keeps going around in my mind is like, how far does it have to go until it becomes a universal thing? Because when one state does something, like it almost becomes like a model or a template for other bodies, other political bodies, to do the same thing, right?
Mhm.
And even though like our president is a Democrat, even though one of our the House of Representatives is largely left leaning, right? The fact that it could sway either way, and
Mhm.
that the you know, executive and judicial systems could just be like, well, this is a state thing. Let's states just figure it out.
Yeah.
Like that really makes it so uncertain, I think, for a lot of people in different.
Isn't it funny that all the bullshit in this world comes down to the South trying to argue states' rights?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
saying.
Well,
Just-
and it usually is anything that is opposite or that's different than white
Mhm.
cisgender heterosexual men and what they want, right? Like if it's anything contrary to what they want, like it's a threat, right?
Mhm.
And
But the worst
unfortunately,
part is they're the ones who are deciding all of this stuff. And it's like that's why these laws get passed, is because the majority of people who are representatives in power are cis, white, heterosexual men.
Mhm.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's so true. And weren't you saying that like this is not happening in a vacuum, right? Like, isn't Arizona considering similar
Yes.
legislation?
So let me find the article really quickly. So Republicans in Arizona this week, and this is according to ArizonaMirror.com, which is a journalism source in Arizona. It says that Arizona Republicans this week lined up behind a measure that would discipline teachers and open them up to lawsuits if they do not tell parents everything a student tells them, even if the student confides in them that they are gay or transgender. It's called House Bill 2161, and it would make it illegal for a government employee to withhold information that is, quote, relevant to the physical, emotional, or mental health of the parent's child, end quote. And specifically, it prevents teachers from withholding that information. And all of this is being done on the basis of the fact that these topics could be listed as sexually explicit. That's the wording that they're using in order to make it kind of like this hot topic.
At the risk of throwing up a straw man, isn't it funny how the Republicans can spend 4 years with Trump in office and having control of everything for 2 years and not even propose any kind of an answer to the healthcare bill, which they kept shooting down, can't handle that. But this they can railroad through with no problem. Isn't that funny that this kind of legislation they can railroad through? It just makes me ill. And second risk of throwing up a straw man argument that I'm going to make is, isn't it funny too? Like, this is another example of your children are not extensions of you. Your children are human beings. They are individuals. They are autonomous beings, and they should be allowed. Like, here's the straw man part. They will say, oh, a fetus has rights. And so you can't, that clump of cells is a baby. And so you can't have an abortion. But this teenager who's almost an adult, oh, no, you have to tell me everything that's going on to them. That's not an individual person. Like, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Right. And this
These things are at
suggests
odds with each other.
Well, and this suggests that if they do have some sort of development or understanding of their identity at that age, that it's just, them being a teenager, right? It's not
Right.
anything significant. Ari, were you about to say something? I apologize.
Yeah, all it does is it makes kids not trust their teachers because they're not safe to talk to anymore. So they can't talk to their parents. They can't talk to their teachers. They can't talk to their principal. They might not even be able to tell their friends what's going on because their friends might out them or do something. So they're like holding on to all of this stuff, all of these feelings, and they may not be able to go anywhere with that. I mean, how is this going to affect them mentally? Are they going to, is there going to be mass suicides or something?
Right.
Because they don't know how to deal with these feelings, and like they're being othered by their whole community.
and because we're othering, because we're saying there's something inherently dirty, there's something inherently wrong, there's something inherently ugly about what you're doing. So then all that does is that opens the door to drugs and, you know, illicit sex work, where you're putting yourself in dangerous positions. Sex work is work, but this is, I'm not talking about regulated, safe sex work. I'm talking about young people having no place else to go and ending up on the street. I've seen it. You know, this is like growing up in the 80s again, you know, with not being able to, you know, be open about your sexuality, not being able to be open about who you are. And it's just disgusting. And this also touches on something that we've kind of touched on before in a past conversation, like, you know, with the schools saying, or the government trying to say, well, you know, it's all about sexuality. It's like, is it, or is it about who you love? Like, you're the ones that are making this about sex. We're talking about the person I'm in love with. Like, you don't know what my sex life is.
And it's about history. It's about the
Mm-hmm.
history of multiple different communities, their survival, the identities that they forged from that survival. And I get so upset when I see people say, like, well, teenagers shouldn't be about who they choose to have sex with, blah, blah, blah. It's like, being LGBTQ plus is more than who people are intimate with. It is about how we survive day to day. It's about how we express ourselves. It's about how not only our community perceives us, but the community outside of our community perceives us as well. And our survival is inherently connected to all of those different variables. So why should that not be acknowledged, right?
Well, and then you have like Republicans and Christian conservatives saying that more kids are coming out as gay because it's being talked about in school. And it's like, no, it's just because the schools have created a safe environment. They talk about it. Kids like evaluate their feelings, and then they realize, like, oh, hey, I have these feelings. It's kind of like how before they used to make it so that kids were taught to write with their right hand, regardless of whether or not I think there's a graph of like when they started to allow kids to write with their left hand, suddenly there was this mass like number of people who were identified as having left hands. And it's like that. It's because we've created an environment where they can come out and they can talk about who they are, and like they're in a safe environment. And it's like, it's always that they were there, but it's like now they're being safe to allow themselves to come out.
Right.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah. Like, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and, you know, that was the height of the religious right, you know, coming out and, you know, being controlled. So there was all that awful pray the gay away crap. And I love my mom, but she had those books sitting out in her living room. And I remember looking at those books and thinking, what must that feel like for my brother to think I can't even be myself around my own mother, the one person who's supposed to love you no matter what. To her credit, she came around eventually. But I remember that just really striking me, and that just really like hitting me in my heart, and just being like, what must that feel like? You know what I mean? To not feel safe in my own house. Of course, that's going to mess you up mentally. And of course, that's going to, where else can you go? What else can you do? You know, and so he ended up putting himself in all kinds of unsafe positions, because I'm sure at the core of himself, he must have felt, I'm already screwed up. I'm already damaged. I'm already, messed up. I'm already less than. So what difference does it make? Right.
And Panda brings up something like that too. Like, Panda can attest to being raised in a similar don't say gay mentality. It's a nightmare never having a trustworthy adult. And I remember also growing up in a similar environment too. Like, my family eventually came around, but like for a long time, we kind of like just had like this don't ask, don't tell kind of like mentality. And it was
But Donny, you didn't even come out to your parents. You were outed. And that's exactly what this bill does, is that it makes it so that it creates an unsafe environment. And if they try to reach out to somebody, they could be outed to their parents.
Yeah. So they would be put in that same position, right?
Yeah.
Which is terrifying to me.
Yeah. there's so much data out there that proves that is the worst thing you can do for somebody is to out them.
Yeah, I had the luxury of being in college. So, like, yes, it was difficult, but I at least had a support network, right? Whereas, like, what if we're talking about like a 15 or 16-year-old who has nobody, and
Right.
maybe their friends don't even know that they're LGBTQ plus, and it
Right.
like just it would be so isolating.
15,
And that
16, 8 or 9-year-old little kids trying to figure out themselves why does everybody want me to kiss Jill and I want to kiss Johnny? You know what I mean? Like, tell me we don't we don't do that to our kids, like, oh, look at how cute they are. Is that your girlfriend when they're 3? You know what I mean? Like,
it's definitely there's definitely a heteronormative environment where we not only force it upon kids, but we like sexualize it too from an early age. It's really weird and kind of creepy.
It is. It's very unsettling. And I don't know. It just annoys me that things like that are acceptable, but an LGBTQ plus kid approaching a teacher to confide in them and to, talk about them discovering themselves, like that suddenly, like, oh my gosh, indoctrination.
Right.
You know what's really unsettling to me, just as an aside? Fathers who protect their daughter's virginity and they make jokes about having a shotgun and like they'll scare that boy off the front lawn. Isn't that like weird? That's really weird. And it's like a normal like joke that people make. And it's so weird. Like this heteronormative, you stay away from my daughter, she's a virgin.
Right. Like why is your dad so interested in your virginity? Like that's gross and weird.
It's a toxic masculinity thing. This probably should be something we could also talk about next week, because I think that's the episode we're going to be talking about that. But it is weird. It is very like we just have like these weird traditions that
like the whole weird ideas that parents have about their kids like having sex or something.
And like the big joke that the wife and husband don't get along, like, oh, my wife, take my wife, please. Right. Like that's an old joke, an old trope. And that's funny how, oh, my wife's a harpy. Oh, my husband's lazy. Ha ha ha. Like that's all TV shows are. You know what I mean? That's all these heteronormative TV shows are, is like the schlub, useless husband and the super smart wife where you're just like, why are they together? Like that's every freaking comedy routine that's been around since forever.
And that's so acceptable. But if you ask somebody to talk about or watch something that talks about LGBTQ plus people, it's the end of the world.
Well, and then it's always about sex, because that's a stereotype about gay people, is that they don't have romantic intentions and that it's not always about sex. And it comes from the AIDS epidemic, that it became into popular view that like, gay people are having sex. That must mean that they're just overly sexualized.
Yeah. I think it's been around since before the gay. I've heard you say it a couple of times, and I'm like, citation, please. Because I would argue that that's been around since before the gay epidemic. I think that made it worse. I agree with you there. But
I would say that the AIDS epidemic really brought it forth to the forefront, like media-wise, especially. Because before then, like we were talking about that one episode, that LGBTQ plus people were just like, comedy tropes, and they were just, but like when it's attached to a disease, and when we see people villainizing a disease, like they create those negative associations, which end up blowing up and becoming these talking points where it's like, well, that's how the community is, right?
Yeah, I mean, they were comedy tropes, but I mean, also, gay people could be arrested for no reason, just for being gay, and why? Because of the sex you're having, you know what I mean? Like that, it was just, I think it's always been tied into people being afraid of what's happening in somebody else's bedroom, that just terrifies straight people for some reason. It's some weird.
And unfortunately, like the AIDS epidemic upped that fear.
Yeah.
It was like, not only were people being fearful already of LGBTQ plus people, but that fear of like, oh my gosh, like, we could get sick, we could get diseased too. That kind of like thought process just.
Yeah. So I agree. I think that enhanced it quite a bit. And maybe that's what you're seeing. You know what I mean? I think that enhanced it quite a bit. Yeah.
At the risk of generalizing, it seems to me that like Christian conservatives and the right like have a problem just in general with sex. Like sex like scares them and upsets them. Like, okay, so I watched that movie Redeeming Love where it showed two people in a very Christian marriage relationship having relations with each other and like having sex. And then all of a sudden I watched all of these reviews about how is this okay for Christians to watch. And it's like they didn't even take their clothes off. They were married, and that's the only kind of sex that they showed was them having relations in a committed relationship. And it's like, how weird is it that Christian conservatives and the right, like, they just have so warped ideas about what sexuality is in general.
Yeah.
And that's why you have things like where they don't even want to talk about gay people is because it immediately goes to sex and they're very uncomfortable talking about sex.
Well, you know, when you're going to talk about Christianity, you're talking about rules made by a bunch of Bronze Age men to further their own needs and their own wealth and protect
that whole
their own wealth and
puritanical like mindset.
Yeah, that's all the laws and rules that were written. That was just so that they could protect their own interests and protect their own wealth, including their wives, which were part of their chattel, counted as part of their household.
Mhm.
So, you know, that's anyway.
Leo. It's so true. Yep. Spot on.
10 out of 10.
So
anyway, we've gotten down the rabbit hole.
Let's look at like, okay, so obviously I think it's important for us to understand which states actually have protections versus what states do not. So I'm going to do a screen share here and show everyone.
Everybody gird your loins because this is going to scare the crap out of you.
Yeah, this is going to
Or it won't shock you at all because maybe you're expecting this, but get in your head, how many states do you think have legal protections?
Yeah.
And
so I think, is this large enough? I think. Okay. So the states in red, according to this map here, have full LGBTQ plus non-discrimination protections. So as you can see, Michigan is definitely not in that. But there are a number of states in the East Coast and the West Coast that do have those protections. The darker blue, which is Wisconsin, I don't think there's any other. I think it's just Wisconsin. Are states with non-discrimination laws lacking gender identity protections. And then there are states like Utah, which have some very generalized non-discrimination protections. So as you can see, the majority of our country has no laws in place for protecting LGBTQ plus people,
And
which is why
go ahead. This thing I want to see about this map is how many of these states voted blue in the last election? Like, I wonder what the overlap is for that. I'm just like, I'm seeing this and I'm really thinking about it. And it's like,
Well, if I remember correctly, like the blue definitely reflected where those non-discrimination protections are for sure.
Yeah. Kind of like the strong blue, like, you know, there's of course the flyover states in the middle. There's, you know, the coasts, which tend to go blue pretty immediately. And then, of course, there were the swing states. And notice the swing states, the ones that decided this last election, all of them in the gray. And that's disappointing and terrifying. That means we could just as easy go red again in the future.
Yeah.
It's just like there's kind of an atmosphere when you get to these states that have the protections of like, they're protecting not just the LGBTQ plus community, but they're also protecting Black people. They're protecting Muslims. They're protecting Hispanic people who may be undocumented citizens. So like, because I lived in Seattle, especially in Washington, and they got flack for a while for being a sanctuary city. And that was kind of like not many cities were sanctuary cities after Trump got elected, that they had dropped their sanctuary city status because he was talking about removing funding to their states.
Yeah.
So it's like there's kind of like an atmosphere when you go to these places of like protecting all groups of marginalized groups in general. And it's like, I wonder how many of these states that are in gray have sanctuary cities or have protections for these other marginalized groups and like, do things to protect them.
Right.
Yeah.
So like literally over half the states don't have any protections in place, according to the rest of this article. And by the way, everyone, we can share links to these sources for you after the stream. I'll have them posted in the description section of this video. But I really just find that map very sobering. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, I guess the big thing that I will always have people tell me, and usually these are, cisgender white heterosexual men that tell me this, they will tell me, well, Donny, like at least things are better than they used to be.
Gay marriage.
It's like, yeah, there's marriage equality, so everything's perfect. Like, no. Please don't gaslight me. Like, there have been advancements in certain areas, but again, look, there are states like Florida and Arizona, which are completely taking this in the opposite direction. And for all we know, it could increase dramatically.
As quickly as we make these adjustments forward, they can go backwards. Look at Russia. Russia had LGBTQIA protections for a long time, and now it's criminalized. Now you can go to jail for being gay. Now it's gone completely the other direction. So you can make advancements, yes, but also we can lose them. Look at what's happening to Roe versus Wade and how that's getting eroded away. Look at what's happening to the Equal Rights Amendment and how they're fighting over whether that should be ratified or not. Look at how, all of these things that it's like 3 steps forward and sometimes it's 5 steps back. Now, in general, let's pull back, right? In general, if we look at the entire timeline of humans, we eventually do become more left. We do eventually become more liberal. We do eventually become more accepting. We do eventually become more open to ideas as a people. So we're seeing it happen in real time, which is why it's terrifying and which is why we're seeing these stutters and we're seeing these, aggregate kind of changes. And within our lifetime, it's hard to say which way it's going to go. But I have to hold to that idea of, if you look at the entire human timeline, we do over time become more liberal. We do over time become more liberal with a lowercase L. We do become over time more, more left-leaning, more open, more accepting of different peoples.
And I think those are excellent points. Ultimately, it's also connected to education.
Yes.
That's why I think this is uniquely unsettling, because not only is this affecting the specific communities in question, but it's also dictating the trajectory that education takes.
Yes.
And if education is dictated, that could completely shift things and prevent groups of people from understanding the significance of representation, finding self-acceptance, a whole variety of different things. I wanted to take a second here and share with you some statistics. And this is for the people who would argue that, oh, well, there's marriage equality, things are fine, right? I quote from an ABC News article. It says, 2021 was a record-breaking year for anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. According to the Human Rights Campaign, more than 250 of these bills were introduced and at least 17 were enacted into law. Several states, including Arizona, Alabama, Florida, Indiana, Kentucky, Oklahoma, New Hampshire, and South Dakota, have already introduced anti-LGBTQ plus legislation as of 2022.
Wow.
Or it's expected to follow through in 2022, which we're only 2 months. We're not even 2 months into 2022 yet.
Right.
Like, I think that speaks very loudly. Yeah. And it's like, I think, like, I'm always the type of person who is like, I'm optimistic. Education can solve this. Conversations can solve this. Representation, political action. But there's another part of me that's like, don't get too complacent in that optimism, because the moment
Right.
we get complacent in that optimism is when things sneak through like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, like, marriage equality was such a monumental success that I think everyone for a while was like, oh, everything's great. Like, we got this, so
Mhm.
everything else is fine. Ignoring the fact that, education, like in this instance, could be impacted, or, ancestral rights haven't, been covered yet entirely. Health health, like spousal health insurance, so on and so forth. There are many different things that go unprotected.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and just the thing, like playing devil's advocate here, I do understand that parents want some kind of control over their kids' education, and that maybe Christians or the right don't want their kids hearing about certain things that they're not comfortable about them learning about. So, like, as far as like the sex goes, like they have permission slips for sex ed, and like, but it goes beyond that. Like, I don't think that
Yeah.
there needs to be a law in place to like for people to control their kids' education. And there's always homeschooling. That's the thing. Like, they can always homeschool their kids. They don't need to be in a public school setting if they want complete control over what their child learns.
Yeah. Well, not everybody has the luxury of staying home to do that, though. So
Mhm.
I can understand that struggle. My point is, you know, that whole premise is faulty. That whole mindset is faulty, in my opinion. Like, I want to control what my children are learning in the public education system. False. Leave the education up to the educators.
Mhm.
You parent.
But
Talk to
go
your
ahead.
kid about, I was going to say, talk to your kid about what they're learning, and you can impose upon them your family morals. You can impose upon them your family ideas, and then let that frickin' kid, that individual, make up their own damn mind.
Mhm.
They're an
I-
individual. They are not an extension of you. I am so tired of parents treating their kids like they're part of them. They are not.
Well, and this is, I think, a symptom of another problem taking place too, and that's the devaluing of education and educators.
It's
Mhm.
true, yeah.
And I really think the pandemic has exacerbated that considerably, where now, like, these very militant groups of people just think that, educators and healthcare workers just don't know what they're talking about. And they'd much rather, oh, this meme has the information. This is accurate, right? It's like, it's just this very unsettling echo chamber of inaccuracy and misinformation and conspiracy.
Yeah, it's this age of misinformation that we have entered into, that my 2 minutes of Googling is the same as your PhD.
Well, and then there's like this scare system in place. It's like the way that they were talking about, like, oh, what's it called? When they were talking about Black history, and like, what was that called? It was cultural something, or it was some kind of like where they talk about the history of racism in America through
Critical race theory? Are you
critical
talking?
race theory.
Yeah.
It was like that became like a scare tactic word, that like, oh, I have to make sure my kid doesn't learn about that in school, because then they'll
Right.
get ideas. And like, I don't need that liberal teacher talking about that sort of stuff with my kid. It's an extension of that it's like this
Mhm.
scare idea of like, oh, talking about gayness in
Mhm.
schools will turn my child gay, and I
Yeah.
couldn't have that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I was thinking exactly the same thing. It's like,
Right.
well, the civil rights era is done, so everything's fixed, right? Like, the Emancipation Proclamation happened, and so everything's fixed. The end. We have gay marriage. Everything's fine. Everything's fine.
If talking about being gay in school makes people gay, then what? How do I explain me? Like what
Right?
happened? Did like a gay angel descend from the heavens and like just put a tiara on my head? Like, no.
And
Well,
gave you all
now,
the information in a neat little packet.
Well,
like,
now in my
welcome
head,
to
that's
Gay
how it
Town.
happened.
Here's your introduction
Yeah.
package.
I wish
In-
that's how it happened.
In
I
my
could
head,
only,
that's canon now. That's
I could
exactly
only
how it
hope to
happened.
be as fabulous as this heavenly queer angel of fabulousness.
Well, and I had my parents teaching me those kinds of moral puritanicalism that I had all of these feelings when I was a kid, and my mom came to me and said, being with another woman is really hard and you'll get persecuted for it, so you really shouldn't do it. And so like it just kind of made me like afraid to like explore my feelings until I was out of the house, older, and I had more of the ability to like gauge my feelings better. That I, like for this so long I internalized the I can't be gay because it'll upset a lot of people.
Yeah. That sorry, that made me really emotional thinking about it, because I remember that too.
Okay, let's pull it to the chat because Leo and Panda just killed it.
The the angel gay. Yes. Everybody, yep. The gay agenda, yep.
Yeah.
I really want to add to what you said, Ari, from my perspective, because that internalization is so destructive. Like that, those things that are said. Like I literally remember the fleeting gay thought that I could think that, a classmate was attractive, and then I would go home and cry in my shower and pray for hours and cry and that it wasn't real, that I was just being silly, that I was just
going through this.
Right. And I'm grateful that I had college to fall back on not long after that. But if there's a kid who's in a situation where they don't have that luxury, like they could
getting out of the house and getting away and being able to identify their real feelings and explore those.
Yeah. It's so easy to get lost in that isolation and in that shame. And this type of legislation would make any limited resources that there already are out there impossible for them to access.
Right. And that's the point. That's what I think. I think that's the point. I think ultimately they know that, and this is a calculated strike. I can't think otherwise, because time and time again, it's been proven. They're hiding behind this rhetoric of, oh, it's to save the children, but it's not. They're trying to own the conversation, and they're trying to squash, any kind of community that people could be building.
It's all about saving the children they want to save. What about the children that this is going to put in harm's way?
Bingo.
And I feel like this is going to become like the trans bathroom bill. Like there's going to be some like legal arguments coming into place, and then it's going to have to be like decided by the Supreme Court. But like the trans bathroom bill, it didn't get heard by the Supreme Court. So then there's like this weird gray area of where people are allowed to do these things, but they're not seeing any sort of like repercussions for their actions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Like I really think that, like you were just saying, there's just a lack of accountability, So the other day I was on TikTok and I was like watching the public comment for like the debate surrounding this bill in Florida, and there were so many LGBTQ plus people who came forward, and this one young woman said, I love how all of you, well, this is a rough paraphrase, mind you. She basically was like, I love how all of you think that, talking about being gay in school is going to indoctrinate kids. Funny thing, I went to Catholic school and I'm still gay. What do you think about that? And that was like the end of the comment. And I was just like,
mic drop.
Right. It's like, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but every single gay person out there has straight parents or parents who have had straight sex at least. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, That's just
Not
how it
necessarily
works.
true. Not necessarily true.
You don't test tube babies because other than straight sex, that's how the babies happen.
Yep.
Well, and the truth is, though, but we have to think about it. Like, yeah, they might have like parents who could be diverse, but they are also coming into a world where they see nothing most of the
Right.
time other than heteronormative representation.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
that itself, like, really paints the
Mhm.
canvas for them. Like, they don't get any
Mhm.
exposure to see that, they are people, that they are humans, that their experiences matter, that they can see themselves represented in
Mhm.
successful people everywhere, right?
Right.
So the thing that bothers me too is that these kids who with against all odds, like because school is trying, it just passes, and they make it so that it's not talked about. You're not safe to talk about it. You hide all of these feelings, and yet you still come out as gay. When they become adults, businesses can refuse service to them because of religious reasons. So it's like it starts in school and then it goes all the way through adulthood. And it's like
Mhm.
it only gets worse as you get older, the more
Yeah.
discrimination you experience. And that
Right.
people are allowed to discriminate based on their religious beliefs.
Yeah. And like we said, like, then what does that do to your psyche? Right.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do
Yeah.
to your emotional state? What does that do to your mental state? What does that leave for you? What kind of life does that leave for you?
100%.
Yeah. And then that just furthers, this rhetoric of, oh, there's such terrible people. That's why, I mean, again, at the risk of throwing up a straw man, but, we've paralleled this to, other minority groups, and you think about, oh, there's so many, Black men in, prisons. It's like, well, why is that? Let's break down the systemic reasons for this. So this is like systemic anti-gay legislation is all this is, right? This
Mm-hmm.
is, again, part of this system that is just breaking down communities and just breaking down people. And all it's going to do is increase crime, increase, the danger for people, decrease safety for individuals, right? And decrease people's ability to live a decent life. It's all it's going to do. You're not going to, it's like, reversing Roe versus Wade and illegalizing abortions isn't going to make abortions going to go away. It's going to make safe abortions go away. Criminalizing gay people isn't going to make gay people stop being gay. It's going to make it criminalized. So you're turning people, honest people, good people, into criminals for no reason because of your moral high ground.
Moral high ground.
Moral
right?
high ground. Yeah, your high horse that you're on.
And like basically laws like this, like the Don't Say Gay bill, and like where they can businesses can refuse based on their religious beliefs. It's basically trying to state a false premise that gay is a choice.
Right.
Yeah.
And like that's really what it comes down to. That's why they don't want to talk about it in schools, is because they think if they talk about it, they'll choose to be gay. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, did they choose to be straight?
Their whole goal is to sequester the realization that it's not a choice, because that's what education would help these kids realize, that, like, if they are who they are, then they, like, one can choose to, like, embrace that life and embrace identity and choose not to. That's what they're trying to, sequester, unfortunately.
And basically, like, from my perspective, it's that there's this idea that being heterosexual or being cisnormative, that it's like kind of like this pure thing, and that if you talk about it or like acknowledge it, that they're dirtied up into this other this marginalized group of people. And it's like, being heterosexual doesn't mean you're pure. Being gay doesn't mean you're impure. And like I feel like it's something that like is below the surface that nobody really talks about. But it's like it's kind of like this understood thing in cis heteronormative communities.
Yeah, agreed completely. So I get like this begs the question of, does this bill create an atmosphere of hate and fear? And I think we've kind of we've really illustrated that with what we've been saying, that like I think that over the years a lot of work has been made to remove that fear that people have. Like I know like one thing that I always have, especially like the cis heterosexual men in my life tell me, they always tell me, Donnie, I didn't know what gay people were like until I actually met a gay person. To know that, no, we're not these, these crazed sexual succubi trying to suck the straight out of people. Like, no, like, that's not.
I mean, I am, but there's always one, right?
Oh my God, that broke me.
Best ever. Best ever. I was about to say
there's
that
always one.
I was
though.
like, well, I kind of am, but
Okay.
I mean, we all have our moments. The tiara disguises
I'm not
a
being
lot.
serious. I would never. No, I don't actually.
Of course not. I mean,
but
we say that with joking because, of course, the three of us have said, safe, sane, consensual how many times to each other, right? Like,
right.
Consensual, ongoing, enthusiastic consent, which doesn't happen if somebody's not,
Well, and us drawing jest to this situation illustrates just how ridiculous the fear is, right? The fear is simply things that have been passed down from generation to generation, that like, oh, well, that gay person's gonna hit on you, like they want you. It's like, no. Like I will never forget like people in high school when they've encountered me. Like I remember I was a barista for like 10 years. Like every once in a while I'd have like a former bully in high school come up to me and apologize, but then be like, well, I thought you were gonna go after me, I thought you thought I was hot, blah blah blah. And I'd be like, you're not my type, sorry. And then they were offended over that. I'm like,
so funny story. Are we ready for story time? Okay, kids, get your crackers out. Mom's got a story for you. So way back, my stepfather, hi Mom, I know you're watching, Uncle Hal, we called him, not so lovingly, was this gross pig of a man. He worked in a shop, and he was like all the terrible things you've ever heard about a shop worker. He was all of them wrapped up into one nasty, gross bundle of a sweaty person. And he was just like not even cute. Like he was just gross.
Very details.
And he was like the terrible glasses and the slicked back hair because he put mayonnaise in it or something. I don't know how he made his hair look like that. It was just he was just disgusting. Shirts too short, and so his gut would stick out. He was just gross. So this human being, and I use that term loosely, hated my brother, hated everything about him. Mostly he hated the fact that my brother was gay, and he was forever like, well, you better keep it to yourself, blah 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 blah. And my brother was like, really like, I hate to tell you and all your little cronies out there, but ain't no gay man coming after you. Like, sorry.
Right.
Whenever somebody is like, well, don't overdo it, don't be too gay, I want to enter the town square on a white horse with a unicorn horn in elaborate, beautiful gowns of
lots of
embellished feathers. Like I just want to be the most dramatic.
You want to be gay Godiva.
Gay diva.
I have another story. You want to hear another story?
Yes.
So again, about my brother. So my brother was the gay Godiva of Bay City. He really kind of was. He would dress up like Boy George, just like because this is Boy George in the 80s. So if you don't know, Boy George was this very flamboyant singer in the 80s. Wore long like braids in his hair and colorful clothes. Mm-hmm. And my brother loved his style, digged it, dug it. And so he would like dress all up and just walk down the streets. And he got bashed one day, very, very badly. He was taken to the hospital. He was just by a bunch of flannel wearing rednecks. I was told by a family member whose name will remain nameless. Well, it's his fault for wearing what he wore. If he hadn't worn those clothes and walked down the street, then maybe he wouldn't have And I stopped that person right there. And I'm like, oh, so if you hadn't worn that short skirt, you wouldn't have been raped? Is that what you just said to me right now?
That's all I heard was.
That's
Yeah.
literally all I heard. Like, I'm sorry, it's not about the clothing. I'm like, how about these two knuckle dragging troglodytes should not have beaten up my brother just for being himself and minding his own damn business?
And how is it going to be when they pass the Don't Say Gay law? Is it, or bill? It's like, is it going to create this atmosphere where it's okay for bullies to bully someone because they're gay, because the school doesn't think it's acceptable, the state doesn't think it's acceptable? It's like that. It's like this dirty little secret that you have to keep, and it's like,
yeah,
what is that going to do for teachers who have a kid who's being bullied because they're gay? Like, are they going to stand up for them?
That's a good point, because now not only is that gay kid hearing this story that this is wrong and I'm evil and I'm dirty, but the straight kids are hearing you're wrong, you're dirty, you're evil. That's how we get dead gay kids.
And that's how, that's how it becomes internalized.
Yeah, but that's how we get straight kids beating up the dead and making the gay kids dead. Like, that's how, you know, was that kid in Laramie?
Michael Shepard.
Matthew Shepard.
Matthew Shepard. That's all I can think of, right? It's Matthew Shepard, right?
Yeah.
Because what were those kids? What were they
learning from their parents about what's acceptable, how to treat somebody?
Right. What did they learn? What did they get out of their mother's milk?
It's just like, I think a lot of us in the LGBTQ plus community, like, we are really hopeful with the momentum we've had over the past few years, but deep down we all know that we're always standing on top of a rug that can be ripped off from underneath of us. You know, all it takes is one group with a bill or with a bit of like legislation to pass things through to completely reverse that. That's what makes it so scary, that there are groups of people out there who could and gain the traction, to reverse.
Yeah, it's because it's all so new. All of these gay rights have happened within my lifetime. All of this, from Stonewall on up, this has all happened within my lifetime. Think about that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think the question that we need to ask, because we're getting towards the end here, is what can we do in our communities to stop this from spreading?
I think that's a great question. I think the first step is acknowledging that this is a problem and like having conversations like these. I've been having conversations with some friends in Florida, and I've been encouraging them to like call your representatives, call your state senators, express your discontent with this bill.
I'd say that regardless of whether or not you're in Florida or these states that are affected, you should call your representative and tell them exactly how you feel on the state level and on the national level.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is, like, all of these senators and representatives, they do have contact lines. Like, they do hear from constituents. So it's just a question of speaking out. I like, again, voting. Like that, I think.
Even on a non-election year, because your representatives are just as important as the president.
More important, I would argue.
Well, because these state level representatives, especially like many of them are elected on non-presidential election years. Those are so crucial because these are the bodies that are passing these state level bills that are leading to this, you know.
Right. And like who your governor is has more effect on your life than who your president is, in my opinion.
Who your city council is.
Oh, that's true too. Yeah.
You know, take it down to the local, the very local level. Start there. That's where your energy should go. Run for city council. That's an even better way to affect change. Run for city council in your local city, in your local municipality. Run for dog catcher. Run for something, right? We need more people like us in the local government. We need more people like us making the decisions. Run for anything you can, anything you feel like you're capable of doing. run for that office. A lot of these just get filled because they run unopposed. They've been in that position for ages and nobody runs against them. And so they just get it. Run against them. So people might be like, oh, that's a new name, right? Like, campaign, get out there. We need more people like us in these positions of power, particularly on the local level.
Right.
And for Donny and I, who are educators, normalize the other conversation. Normalize having gay writers, having gay artists, having gay voices in our curriculum. Don't just stick to the cis het curriculum that everybody else teaches and has taught since Plato. Put in those other voices. If I'm going to talk about I can't think of a straight cis male artist right now. If I'm going to talk about Picasso, then I'm sure as hell going to talk about Robert Mapplethorpe. I'm sure as hell going to talk about Juliana Huxtable. I'm sure as hell going to talk about these other artists that are out there, so I can get these other voices in the conversation, because that's where we make the difference.
And by having these conversations, we undo this notion that like, oh, it's just for political, it's just politics, because that's the common argument.
Sexual, or that it's like something that like
an agenda.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, it's so much more than that. Like people, again, it's connected back to representation. People need to be able to see that there are others like them who were out there living their lives, overcoming challenges, being who they are, accepting who they are, and surrounding themselves with people who do the same thing. I really think, like, I want to reach out to allies right now and send this message to allies. Allies, we need you. I know there are instances where you may not feel comfortable enough speaking up, but we need you to do that, because as LGBTQ plus people, like, many of us are willing to fight. But when you are facing foes on multiple different fronts, juggling your own trauma, like, that's a lot to handle, right? So that's why we need allies who are vocal and who are active and engaging and participatory, because without them, like, we need that support, essentially.
Right.
And it's basically, you should go from, and they mentioned this in other marginalized communities, that you not just need to not be an ally, but an accomplice. And so like, speaking up and doing something about it makes you an accomplice.
Right. Good point.
Agreed.
Yep.
Well, my friends, this has been a great conversation. It's a difficult conversation, but during these times, like, these difficult conversations are expected. They need to take place, because if we don't have those conversations, things like this are allowed to just continue to happen without any type of recollection or
well, and us having this platform, I think we need to have these conversations. If nothing else, like, the first thing Donny said to me when we, started out the conversation tonight is backstage, he said to me, I've been kind of a wreck. I've been thinking about this all day, and it's been kind of dominating my day. And you shouldn't feel alone, and you shouldn't feel isolated, and you shouldn't feel like that. We need to share this time together. That's another thing we can do, right? Is be here for each other and talk to each other and love each other and extend that grace to each other. Because if you can't pick up that yoke, maybe I can help pick it up with you, and together we can carry it.
And this is why I'm grateful I have both of you and all of you listening. We are our biggest supporters, and I think that is very empowering. I love it.
So share this conversation with your friends. When this goes live and this records, share this recording with your friends. Put it on your social media. This is a conversation that we need to continue having.
Agreed, 100%. Well, my friends, again, thank you for taking the time to listen. Go subscribe to our respective channels. Keep having the conversations. And remember that we love you. Talk to you soon. Bye.